welcome to the webinar. As you know, today we're going to help you by providing you with some really valuable content on how to navigate the new overtime rules. My name is Sunil Rajaraman. I'm the head of marketing with Replicon. As many of you know and are familiar with our solutions, we are one of the largest providers of time tracking software and professional services automation software to help organizations of all sizes with some of the basic administrative tasks around management. I am joined here by Brian Dixon, who's the co-chair of the Wage and Littler, one of the prominent law firms here. And Brian is an expert on the subject. He represents employers before state and federal courts in compensation disputes and audits involving the Department of Labor, California's Division of Labor Standards Enforcement, and the enforcement agencies of other states and private plaintiffs. Brian has particular expertise in all aspects of employee compensation, including minimum wage, prevailing wage, overtime compensation obligations, and incentive compensation plans. So he will be doing a large part of the talking today since he's the expert, but I'll be doing a few introductory slides, and then Brian, I will hand it over to you, and you can add to that introduction if you'd like. Next slide, please. All right, we thought since we're diving into a heavy subject, we'd start on a lighter note with a comic here. No better way to start off with a comic. So we'll let you digest this, but since you're all on mute, we won't be able to hear your silent laughter. We'll just assume that you enjoy the comic. All right, so what are we going to go over today, and what can you expect to get out of this? What time is, and believe it or not, there's some subjectivity to that, which Brian will get into later. There's what the update is, how it's your business, and what your options are to basically plan for the change. And by covering all of that, you'll be in a position to basically navigate these new rules and do what's necessary to implement the changes. So we do have quite a few attendees on the call today, so everybody is currently on mute. There will be a Q&A section where you can ask Brian anything you'd like, or myself, and the Q&A section will take place at the end of the webinar. Please submit your questions anytime, and you'll see the little questions text box located at the right side of your screen. And the moderators will get to as many, if not all, the questions. There will be a poll during the presentation that will come later, where when you respond, we really appreciate it, and we'll provide poll results in real time. All right. So to start with, what is overtime, right? And so I mentioned a little bit earlier that it's subjective, not objective. Overtime at its essence is additional compensation for any hours worked over the regular work week, as defined as 40 hours, but or 8 hours a day, depending on your state. There's state-by-state rules, which we'll get into a little bit later, but overtime is paid out at 1.5 times regular pay. Employees who are eligible for overtime are called non-exempt employees. Those who are not eligible for overtime are called exempt employees, and that's a bit of a tongue twister, and it's not as intuitive. But once again, if you're eligible for overtime, you're called non-exempt. Not eligible, exempt. There are tests involved to determine whether an employee is eligible for overtime or not. And Brian, I'll hand it off to you to talk a little bit about the tests. If we could include the build effect here for the slide to our organizers.
Sure. Thanks, Sunil. And good morning, everyone. Hope you're having as wonderful a day as it is here in San Francisco. Clear and warm for a change instead of cool and foggy. And as Sunil pointed out, there are 3 different tests for exempt basically 3 different requirements to be overtime exempt. I sometimes call them the 3 Qs. One is compensation. One is what quality of work do you do, what are your exempt duties, and the third is the primary duty test, or what is your more quantitative requirement. In some states, of course, like California, that quantitative requirement is very strict. It's you have to spend more than 50% of your time as if measured by a stopwatch in exempt work, and that, of course, can lead to many, many disputes about how an employee actually spent his day. We want to be sensitive to the fact that many states have quantitative requirements, if not in every overtime exemption, in some overtime exemptions. So looking at outside sales exemptions across the United States and was struck by how varied they are by state, by state, by state. Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Illinois, all having quite quantitative requirements. We pay the salary by the week. We have to, if you do any work in the week, it triggers the obligation to pay the salary for the week unless there's a permitted reason to reduce the salary, such as full day off for vacation, full day off for sick leave, and some of the other very rare circumstances in which a salary can be reduced. And we know that we can't reduce a salary based upon the quality or quantity of work.
Thanks, Brian. And we'll get back to you shortly. But I'm going to talk briefly about, so why is, it's just so difficult to comply with. I mean, just a few things you should know. And of course, you can read the slide. But according to, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics reports that, one of the largest contributing factors to increased labor costs is overtime accrual. Overtime is the leading cause of labor litigations, and since 2007, $3.6 billion in penalties has been assessed overall, with a major portion of that having to do directly with overtime penalties. And we certainly don't mean to use this as a scare tactic, but great that you're attending the webinar and learning the rules now so that you can be in a position to preemptively comply. And the reason that businesses fail to comply with overtime rules, and this is especially true right now if you're using a manual process, if you're using paper, if you're using Microsoft Excel, as I mentioned, overtime rules are complex and subjective. So consistent application of the rules can be extremely difficult. You have the added layer of complexity of they vary by location, so each state and city can have their own versions of what works and what doesn't. And many of you are familiar with the on-demand workforce or have a large portion of your workforce that works remotely. These technologies are all wonderful, but they add a layer of complexity to your overtime management. So this is why it's so difficult to comply with overtime rules and why it takes webinars to explain what's going on. Brian, I don't know if you have anything to add to this particular slide. If not, we can move on.
The one thing I'd observe is that it's very easy, especially for a larger organization, to want to simplify how it administers pay and determine that sort of from the front end, this is how we're going to do it. But you need, one of the things that an organization really needs to understand is that you need to start with what the rules are and work backwards to what your solution is. I've dealt with quite a few cases where the company's pay policy actually flowed from the CFO playing golf with another CFO and a conversation on a golf course resulting in this is I'm saving money doing this, you should do the same thing. Really close scrutiny of exactly what the rules are has no substitute in order to avoid some of the large liabilities that Sunil's pointed towards.
All right, so let's just talk a little bit about why there's a change being planned, because it is important to understand some of the context. So the last change to the threshold was done in 2004, which is obviously a long time, but putting it in context, it's only been updated once since the 1970s, and that's the 2004 change. So the exemption was originally meant for high-paid workers with better benefits, but over the years, there's been a pretty significant erosion in the salary threshold. So, to put it kindly, the salary threshold is outdated, and it only provides protections for about 7% of full-time salaried workers based on their existing pay. When the laws were first introduced in, the 70s, the protection was for 62% of the workers. It has been a leading cause of litigation over the years. So exempt status and abuse and misclassification has created a lot of legal issues, and the change is an attempt to tackle these issues and prevent complex litigation. And it is needed as, some workers earning less than the poverty line for a family of four earn too much to automatically qualify for overtime at, if you think about it, $455 per week. So there is reason behind the change, and those are some of the reasons as stated. So now I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who is going to dig into the nitty-gritty, and I'm going to go on mute. So next slide, please, and Brian, take it away.
Thanks very much. Sunil, I appreciate your introduction there and your well-taken comments about how severely the threshold has eroded. We do have a new rule. It's going to remedy a lot of what Sunil pointed to in terms of the fact that it will impact 4.2 million workers across the United States. It's anticipated that the change will impact women somewhat more than men and may impact, for example, Hispanic employees somewhat more than non-Hispanic employees and other minorities as well. And if we could continue with the builds in the slide to the end of the slide, I would appreciate it. The salary threshold is going to be reset at a floating point in the future at the 40th percentile for the census area that has the lowest wages. That's currently the South. So the annual salary to be exempt is going to jump from $23,000 up to $47,000, which is really quite an increase. It's very interesting to stop and think for a moment about what impact that might have on the distribution of jobs in the United States. Over the recent decades, we've seen a strong movement towards the South and the Southwest, which are historically low-wage areas, because employers can realize cost savings in moving there. Now some of that cost savings will go away in the sense that we have a single nationwide standard, which is probably appreciably higher than what salaried exempt employees have been paid in the South and Southwest. So we may see a little bit of less inclination to move businesses from the far west, the north, into the south. We will have an automatic update every 3 years. It'll occur on January 1st. We'll come back to that in a moment. The other important thing to realize is that the duties test is not changed. We're only talking about a change in the salary level. There had been a great deal of concern that the Department of Labor would, when it issued the new rule, revisit when, for example, a supervisor can be exempt and whether a supervisor can concurrently do managerial work and non-managerial work. In other words, is there really a division between what the head is doing and what the hands are doing? There were some other concerns about the computer professional exemption and the outside sales exemption, but those fears have not come to pass. The definition of highly compensated employees has also changed. This is the short form test that is allowed, excuse me, in a small way creates a presumption that someone paid at this rate of pay can be considered to be overtime exempt. But when you stop and think about it, $134,000 is quite a high salary, and the odds of this applying are somewhat limited. One of the other new items is that to soften the blow a little bit of this cost increase is now up to 10% of the lower salary amount, and let me emphasize the lower salary, pay $47,476 annually, or $913 a week. About 10% of that can be made up by non-discretionary bonuses and commissions. You have to pay the bonus or commission not less frequently than quarterly, or you can pay it quarterly or more frequently, but not less frequently, shall we say. And at the end of the quarter, you have the opportunity to make a one-time make-up payment in case the commissions or the bonus for the quarter were short, but you have to make it in a very short time period after the end of the quarter. It has to be made in the first pay period following the end of the quarter, which means that you have to crunch your bonus and commission numbers extremely quickly under the DOL's new rule if you're paying quarterly. Certainly some incentive to pay your bonuses or commissions more frequently than quarterly exists there. One thing I will emphasize is this ability to make up 10% of the minimum salary only applies, again, to the employees who are expected to make $913 $13 a week or $47,000 a year, you do not get the opportunity to use this makeup provision with respect to highly compensated employees, no matter how highly compensated they may be. One little detail that I'd like to draw your attention to, but it's an important detail. We talked earlier about the fact that the salary is a weekly pay obligation. If an employee performs any work in the week, you have to pay the salary, full salary for the week, subject to the limited number of circumstances in which you can reduce that salary, such as vacation and sick leave. The new salary requirement will come into effect on December 1st, which chosen perhaps was not the greatest of administrative convenience, because December 1st is a Thursday. So if you want your employees to be exempt in the week including December 1st, and your work week begins, for example, on Sunday and ends on Saturday, you're going to have to put the new minimum salary rate in effect on that Sunday. That would be November 27th, preceding the December 1st Thursday. Why don't we go on and look at the next slide? And that addresses some of the increase that will occur in 2020. And this is important when you stop and think about, okay, what am I going to do? We'll talk about options for compliance in a few slides down the line, but you can see we're going to run from $47,476 up to $51,168. That's anticipated. Of course, if inflation takes off, it could well be more than $51,000, and if we run into continued deflationary economy or stable economy, it may not rise all that much. But certainly.
Hey, Brian, it's Sunil. I'm sorry to interrupt your flow and your slide, but I do want to call attention to this slide. This is pretty staggering. Like this is a pretty dramatic impact, going from almost no change in threshold to, first of all, nearly doubling, and then going up even more. That's just pointing out that this is significant, right?
Well, it is, Sunil, and there's certainly a risk that that this change, as well as some of the other challenges that you pointed to on the local level, particularly living wage ordinances that have increased minimum wages in many locales, and many states are now becoming very activist in increasing their minimum wage rates. California and Washington, with a great deal of tinkering at a level that we've never seen before. So I certainly share your concern. And one thing that we want to be aware of is that, and I'll repeat this several more times, but someone doesn't become exempt by virtue of being paid the minimum salary. There are three requirements: the salary, work of an exempt quality or the duties test, and a sufficient quantity of exempt work, which is the primary duty test. Here's a brief summary from a Department of Labor publication about what the duties tests are for executive, administrative, and professional employees. A couple things to be aware of. One is the increase in the salary rate may actually be a silver lining for some employers that have been classifying people as exempt who may not meet the duties tests. So, I've talked to a number of clients who, looked at a couple job classifications and thought, it's a little borderline as to whether to make the duties test, and now with the salary being bumped up appreciably, it gives them the most wonderful opportunity to clean up potential problems, because they can go to employees and say, you're now going to get overtime. And the employee says, why didn't I get this, yesterday, the week before, or earlier this year? The employer can say, because the law changed. And we only get opportunities like this to make persuasive explanations as to why a change should only apply prospectively once in a great while. So a great deal of candor in assessing who is exempt and who should be continued to be paid as exempt is very, very important. One thing I'll point out, this is, of course, a summary. It doesn't address the exemption for computer occupations. It doesn't address, which does have, either pay hourly or pay salary option in it. And of course, it doesn't address outside salespeople, because for outside salespeople, there is no minimum compensation requirement. And let's go on and look at our next subject. Sunil, what do you think the impact on business is going to be of these new
So the Department of Labor effectively contends that the new rule is going to cost about $1.5 billion annually to employers. 1.2 billion, 800 million of that is just administrative costs. That's a lot of money in administrative costs. The workforce as we know it. So pretty significant. So what are your options? I'm going to give you the Cliff's Notes version, and Brian's going to really dig in and get into the details. But basically, you have a few options. You can either pay time and a half for overtime work to people who are affected. You can raise workers' salaries above the new threshold. That's also an option. You can limit workers' hours to 40 per week. Or you can do some combination of the above, and that's really what it boils down to, your options. And of course, there's nuances which we're going to get into, and I'll hand it over to Brian to discuss those and how they'll impact your organization.
And I'll point, Sunil has articulated the list as the Department of Labor would have employers think about it. Of course, there's a fifth option, which is you can leave the country. In an era where jobs of substance are ever more portable via the internet, I think the Department of Labor might have been a little short-sighted in thinking that it can boost salaries and not have some impact on overall employment opportunities in the United States. So that's for compliance. An office manager who is below the new minimum required salary level but doesn't work any overtime. And it is true that a tree can fall in the forest and make no noise. The challenge is that sound travels a long ways these days, particularly when it comes down to how someone is paid and the possibility of overtime. So we want to be aware of the fact that, of course, if someone is a non-exempt employee, even if you think they will never work overtime, we are still obligated to have an accurate record of the employee's hours of work. And the Department of Labor has pointed out that that does not necessarily mean that it has to punch a mechanical time clock, but you do need an accurate record of the employee's hours of work. And I can say from my constant litigation of wage and hour issues that there is no substitute for having the most accurate record you possibly have. And if that often means utilizing portable devices, especially for employees who work at home or who travel, in order to be able to quickly and efficiently record time. You certainly need a robust timekeeping system. So I will leave this slide with an invitation that we all shudder, and that is that we should never think the world is so perfect that an employee will never work overtime, and we do want to remember our record-keeping obligation. Let's go on and talk about other options. Leave somebody as exempt and increasing their salary. Well, that's certainly an opportunity. I think the Department of Labor anticipates that some employees will receive pay raises as a result of the new rule. Here, managers to make allowances for calls to the Far East or Europe in order to discharge all of the duties of the manager's job. The challenge is several here. One is, okay, we're going to push your salary up, but your peer has been working here several years longer than you have, and their salary is just above the threshold. Does that mean we have to move their salary up? Well, there's no legal requirement to maintain that differential, but it certainly complicates your pay changes. The term is called compression. You cannot differentiate readily more responsibility that may have longer hours, that may have more stressful working conditions. So we want to be mindful of that. We also want to be mindful of the fact that, again, we're going to see another push upwards in 2020, and we need to be thinking ahead to that. If we rearrange our salary levels now and they feel okay, where are we going to be 3 years, roughly 3.5 years out now? Let's go on and look at another option in the next slide. we can certainly reclassify someone and pay someone overtime. And once someone starts falling appreciably below the new $47,000 threshold, reclassification really is your best economic alternative. The cost of pushing the salary up is often going to be more than the overtime cost, especially if you begin to manage your overtime. And I think that's one of the things that that might be pointed out as a shortcoming in the Department of Labor's rule, and that is the DOL has anticipated that more employees will be paid overtime, they will earn more money, but employers are always having to manage costs. That's just the way of the world, and the fact that an employee may be eligible for overtime doesn't mean that the employer is going to authorize it. And it may mean that we're going to see changes in service levels in various retail and service environments. It will certainly increase the value-added approach of going to automation in terms of a solution for providing additional services. One thing that we do want to be aware of is over till you're gradually add up to an person's salary if we had 6 or 7 employees who are in this job classification. And example of potential compliance, but we shorten hours of work and a good platform for pointing out some of the challenges that are specific to the people who are being reclassified. To higher minimum salary is going to affect employees in the first tier of management, supervisors, frontline supervisors, who have previously been exempt and had great flexibility in using, planning their hours of work, dealing with kinds of work tasks are now going to be, quote, on the clock. And one of the inevitable outcomes of trying to control cost and having employees who have responsibilities they need to discharge is some conflict or friction in the middle, known as an off the clock. Will be essential. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the kinds of activities that can give rise to disputes about work time.
Brian, and on that subject, and I have to be the moderator, time Grinch. Looks like for the examples, if we could get through these and see the question queue pilot
Great.
for within our hour time. So maybe if we could breeze through the examples, get through the poll, and then we'll turn it largely to the Q&A for the last 20 minutes or so.
Happy to do that. You $1,000, excuse me, maybe $750 a week, and it included 45 hours of work. We're going to maintain your overall compensation level, but we're going to divide by maybe 45 or 47 and a half in order to come up with an hourly rate that means we won't have any increase in a little different kind of salary than the white-collar salary. For all their hours of work in a week, whether many or few, do 1 hour, you get your salary, do 50 hours, you get your salary. You can pay, and that is shown by the example here, is you divide the salary by the hours worked in the week to get an hour. You just pay 1/2 of that result for your overtime hours. Very user-friendly to employers because as more hours are worked, you're only paying additional time increments, not time and a half increments. And especially for employees, assistant managers, first-line supervisors, where you want people to exercise an initiative. You don't want to be tracking every hour. The fluctuating workweek pay plan may be appealing. There are some caveats. You can't use them in all states, Alaska, California, Connecticut, Hawaii, New Mexico, and Pennsylvania. No to fluctuating workweek pay plans. if an employee does any work in the week, you have to pay the full salary for the week. You cannot reduce it as you would a white-collar salary for absence due to vacation or sick leave. So there are some real challenges with a fluctuating work week pay plan. There's some real advantages. The one rule that I always have is you have to make sure the pay plan is in writing and signed up by the employee, and the employee is trained as to how that pay plan works. Let's jump forward to the next slide about the credit for bonuses and commissions. These do have to be non-discretionary bonuses and commissions, although that fairly broadly. Some caveats to watch are if your bonus plan has, for example, something, for example, that commissions can be split in the discretion of management. There's an element of discretion to revise. Or if determination as to whether milestones are met is in the discretion of management, then it may not meet the standard of being non-discretionary. You can see the amount that you can take as an offset here. One of the most recurring questions we have is, what if some hurry up and pay them their makeup pay in order to make sure it doesn't lose? And again, you just have one pay period to do any makeup. Talk about state impact for just a minute. Then we're going to go on to a poll. Don't want to lose track of state law. I am a Californian. I sit here in the state that has more wage and hour litigation than any other, probably by a factor of about 2. It's enough to keep many of us employed on a full-time basis, which is bad news for employers. One thing about California, the minimum salary level is set as 2 times the minimum wage, the state minimum wage for a 40-hour work week. And the state minimum wage, as I mentioned, is going to go up to $15 an hour in the not-too-distant future. By 2019, the minimum weekly salary to be exempt in California will be $960 an hour. By 2020, the minimum weekly salary will be $1,040 a week, where we're projecting the DOL's minimum salary just to come up to $984. Either of those results in a minimum annual salary of about $52,000 a year. Neil, would you like to ask the audience how they're going to cope with this headache?
Definitely. Thank you, Brian. Next slide, please. We are going to turn it to a poll, and we'll take 30 seconds on this poll. Really appreciate your answer. We will we'll tabulate the results real time. How will you handle the new overtime rule? And please select one of the choices, and this will be really beneficial for the whole audience learning. I'm going to turn it over to the audience and give you about 20-30 seconds to answer this question. The poll is in progress. And while you're taking the poll, Brian, this is great. We have a ton of very interesting questions coming through, so probably for the last 3-4 slides, we'll breeze through them and turn it over to the question. So we have a good section on what should businesses do, and then I'll give a brief spiel on Replicon, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions. So let's close the poll, please. And interesting. Very interesting. What's the response to this, Brian, the poll results?
Well, I think we see that rule, and even by individual job classification, the optimum response for an employer may vary. Increasing pay works. I think I got to think about compression, reclassification. Certainly, your safest alternative. Reclassifying limit overtime. I would just be, that's optimally highlighted in yellow for caution, which means watch the, when you start squeezing down on the hours of work, it's not unusual to get off-the-clock claims from an employee who feels that they're in a Hobson's choice between get the job done and don't work in the overtime.
Excellent. Well, thanks to everyone for answering the poll. And for context, we have almost 100 employers on the line, so this is a very interesting cross-section of what folks should do. Okay, so we'll get through these next couple slides. Brian, I'll let you elaborate, just kind of summarize your findings
Sure.
for the next 2, and then we'll get to the questions.
move things along, why don't we look at the build now? You do need to go and look at who can be, do an individual by individual analysis of, does it make sense to push somebody's salary up or not, or do we have to start paying overtime to end the cost and be on payroll? Can trigger benefit costs, can company costs, both supervisors, employees, supervisors fail to report have to be and there's a lot of training that goes in the next slide, and I'll talk about training a little bit. Employee in the first and assistant manager position, from first line supervisor, other administrative jobs where people may have traveled in the past without any issue because it's they were salary based. They may have taken work home. They borderline call at home while the calls go up. Is work do, or is it de minimis? Do I need to report it? You need to train your employees, not just your supervisors, but your employees, because supervisors have their own set of motives and observations and perspective. You need to make employees your partners in compliance. Be right there in your employee handbook with all your other policies. You have limited to no opportunity to correct the inadvertent failure to pay a salary. And I'm not talking about paying the correct salary. You have to get the amount right. But if you're docking an employee for the wrong reason, you can't fix that or a policy in place. So Neil, some thoughts about replica for this subject?
I will keep these comments so that we can turn into the many questions that we have in here, and it looks like we have a few really good. So a bit about Replicon. Thank you for joining the call. As many of you know, we've been in the time tracking business for a long time, 20 years. Customers love our product because we do have a clean user interface. We've worked with Apple extensively to create the best-in-class mobile app. So for those of you with a mobile and diversified workforce, using Replicon and our Cloud Clock solution is excellent for you. If we're doing our job, we almost sink into the background and automate all of the very difficult process. So one of the advantages of using Replicon, both our time tracking solutions and our services, customers don't break their existing processes to with Replicon. We the process that you already have in place, so that you, the customer, can kind of focus on what you need to focus on. We created all of our solutions from the ground up, so we didn't piece together solutions through acquisition or anything like that. So everything is homegrown, and as such, appears seamless. And as I previously mentioned, we've been in this business for 20 years for helping customers with their time tracking needs. We've helped thousands of customers during time and attendance. So, and this will be the last comments I make about Replicon. Of course, we'll reach out to you after. We'd love to work with you, but here's a quick snapshot. I almost said Snapchat. Of our experience, as I mentioned, we're an Apple enterprise partner, and our mobile app is really best in class and a big value add of using us. And in the context of overtime laws specifically, we do have a global compliance library that will help you stay up to date on every law that could affect your business, and classification and all of the complicated things that Brian discussed. We can help with that, and so you get real-time visibility into your overtime impact, and those 300 million of administrative costs, we can help you keep them at a very, very bare minimum by using Replicon. So thanks for joining us on today's